Facebook headquarters. And that was like a crazy thing. And that literally started with a cold email to one of the executives at Facebook. So just letting you know that you guys are at a great spot right now at hackathons. You never know what's going to happen post this weekend if you really take your project seriously or if you plan to do something crazy. And that could lead to being a product manager as well. So yeah, so while I was in college, I also interned as a software engineering intern at Harvard. Harvard has this iLabs called Incubation Labs, where I worked at one of the incubating startup called Tardisk, where I mostly worked on the front end and back end of the product. And later, I also did UX research at Berkeley. That's like one of those things which I had no experience with, but I knew one of the research scholars there, and she gave me like a quick insight what UX research is, and I worked with one of the professors there on one of the projects that he was working on that summer. And that gave me a bit of insight about what design looks like and how consumers look at design and also probably a product and sort of, and how it changes their behavior and how they use a product. And with those little tiny things, like, having the engineering, rather building products from an engineering point of view, from design point of view, put me in a very good position to become a product manager right straight out of college. So I had this very, non-traditional way to get into product management because, again, I applied to a lot of companies. I'll be honest with you, I applied to Google, I applied to most of the APM programs, and I got rejected. So like, there's no fancy story here. I somehow got myself as a product manager at this Japanese startup, which is based in Cambodia. So it was a crazy experience working for a Japanese startup in Cambodia where they're trying to build a lot of digital products. So I worked there for a while, one of the best experiences ever. And then later on, since last year, I've been working with a startup called Stack and Solutions, which is a startup based in Illinois. Amazing experience, worked on a bunch of B2C products. And then very recently, I started working for this startup called Freight Tiger, which is again a B2B product. And this is a picture of me on the left in South Korea, one of my vacations. Lovely dogs found on the beach, and I'll always love our dogs. Not mine, but someone else's. Right. So this what is going to be a quick review of what I'm going to be talking about today. So giving quick insight what product management is, and talking about my PM skills, what skills you need to become a good product manager. And again, like, this is just my journey. You could come from literally any background. Like, you could be studying literature or history or painting in like college, but you can still get into product management if you have these skill sets. These are not specific to a domain. So you could be doing product management for for healthcare, or probably a extremely technical product, or it could be even like babysitting dogs as a product, if you have the right skill sets. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about in the next hour. So what's product management really? I've been using that word a lot. So let's really get into what it is. So product management is basically, what most people sort of think is, sounds really fancy and snazzy. Like, are you like being a manager and being like a boss, sort of bossing over people? But realistically, it's not managing anybody. It's like one of the biggest, like false thought that, oh, you're going to be like managing a lot of people in 30s, probably become a product manager. But realistically, all you are managing is the product itself, is what it really means. And you have a product, you really think through, let's say it is Uber, or if it is even a very complex product like Amazon AWS servers. You're really thinking through who's using the product and sort of trying to understand what the user wants and how can you make it better. And that is what you really do. So while you're working on making the product better, you're co-working with a lot of different people. So here it could be engineers, where you're telling them, hey, engineers, you guys are doing a great job. I guess this is what the user wants, and let's try and build it together. So the engineers are going to write amazing code to ship it, and then you're going to talk to designers who's going to make like amazing design to make it work. So all you're doing is like working as a team to make things work. But I think product managers essentially take the idea, take the decision, and pitch it to the team that this is what we've got to build next. And they sort of do a lot of research on why this needs to be built. They look at a lot of data. If this is what every single user is asking for us to do, let's go ahead with that. And they make a lot of priority-based decisions as well. like, hey, is this important for us to ship this quarter, or is it something which we can like postpone to the next quarter? So I think a lot of strategic decisions. So it comes with making important decisions and being decisive, and a bit of strategy as well. But being a jack of all trades is what will make you successful eventually. Um, so it fundamentally lies between the cross section of user experience, like design, technology, and business. Because you gotta have a business acumen to make all these decisions. Because everything what you do as a product manager sort of narrows down to what is like how much money is the company gonna make. And I think that is what is fundamentally the biggest indicator. I mean, there could be certain UI changes you could be making, or probably like a button that's going to make an experience better for the user. But eventually, if the user is happy, he's going to give more back to the platform. So I think fundamentally, it's about understanding what goes through the product, the engineering side, the technology, design side, and the business side. And you sort of are in the intersection of all of these three together. And yeah, as I said, so you got to be the voice of the user. Like that is, you got to be like advocate, like really understanding what the user is struggling to do, and trying to reach his goal through a product. So it could be Amazon's website. So if you are someone who comes to Amazon looking to buy your next favorite product, but you realize it's a very irritating experience. You got too many ads on it. Perhaps when you search, you're not finding the right retailer near you, or perhaps the product you're looking for is not available. So I think that's when. So at some point, the user is not happy with the experience, and you gotta really understand the pain points, be empathetic, and bring that empathy back to the team so they can understand what's going wrong and they could like make a fix for it. And this is more from a product standpoint and not on the bug issue fixing standpoint, which is more of a engineering side. But I think it's equally important. If it's impacting the user, you should be responsible for it. And I think it's a very popular code, which goes like, a great product manager has to have a brain of engineer, heart of a designer, and speech of a diplomat. So eventually, I think what is really important is you got to be a great communicator, and having all of these different skill sets combined together, and then box it up together, and then to deliver it. Um, so this is like a good example of how product management sort of also goes. And I think this is like a very standard TV remote. And if you look at it, it's probably like a conference room. Indeed, yes, completely agree, Lane. And I think initially, I think if you roll back to like 90s or probably 80s, the television remotes weren't that complex. Like the only feature that had was a switch on, switch off button, switching between channels, and increasing the volume up and down. But I think over time, needs have become extremely complex. Every user subscribes to at least 4 different OTT channels like Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime and whatnot. So there's literally a button these days when you look at your television remote, which has a Hulu button, a Google Voice button, a Netflix button, which can directly get to that current app that you're browsing through. And this is what happens in product management. So initially, if you look at Facebook's first version, it was very simple, like just a simple home screen, nothing complicated, nothing fancy. But as years go by, users realize they could do a lot more out of this platform, and product managers sort of take that decision to include a lot of features. And at some point, it just becomes too bloated. But it is still usable. Like that is like the best solution, but it's extremely complex. It's like how you use television remote. So fundamentally, some of the skills that you probably look through, I've tried summarizing and coming down to as many as I could, and I feel like these are the most exhaustive list I could come through with. So first, of course, as it is always, as I've always been saying, user focus. So putting the customer in the center is extremely essential, because if you can win the customer, I think you can do anything, and that is what a product manager should always keep in mind, being the customer's voice. And after that, the most other important things is after you understand the customer, you also need to see how many customers are actually talking about it. Like, is this just 5% of the customers complaining about a feature request and the 95% are happy with it? So how are these 5% being impacted? How important are these 5%? Are these 5% like making the maximum transaction on your platform? Are these like the power users of your platform? If they are, I think you got to address them. It's okay if the 95% are perhaps like large in volume, but perhaps the transactions are not that much. I'm not sure how many people are aware of something called the Pareto principle. So Pareto principle basically says that 80% of your transactions come from 20% of your customers. So these are like your power users. So putting them in the center also sort of becomes extremely essential. So being strategic and analytic also makes a lot of importance when you look at users, and also trying to prioritize what's important. And the other things are more about like what I've been saying before, like having a design sense, understanding how design works. So when I say design, it doesn't have to be the aesthetics of it. Like it doesn't have to be really luxurious software or anything of that sort. Like for example, let me tell you, like give examples like bad designs. Like I would not bad designs, but less aesthetic. So if you look at Amazon's website, like I won't say it's the fanciest of the fanciest ones. It has a lot of different buttons around it. Like there's a lot of things are floating around. But when you look at design, it helps you like go to the checkout button in just one click. Like you just press a button, it's right. It skips all the unnecessary steps between and gets you to the goal. So that's essentially what design means. Like design needs to be so seamless that you don't appreciate it. It just happens so naturally that it's just pretty easy. And that's where I talk a lot about design here. And then technical background. And again, I'm seeing this with caution because this is just my experience. I know a lot of people who do not come from a tech background, and technical background is not that important. Let me give an example. Like Facebook is one of the biggest companies out there, and for them, technical background is totally optional now. Like they are in fact looking for people with non-technical backgrounds, people coming from different walks of life. So you could be like an art historian, you could be an architect, you could be like a paleontologist, or you could be from completely different background. And I think that the reason why they're looking for people with a diverse set of experiences is because you come with a different mindset, and you come with much more, customer, like you're outside the bubble, what they have made before. So when you take in like diverse set of thoughts, that improves Facebook's experience, because Facebook eventually is a product very focused on community. And I think when it comes to building a community product, they want more people outside the bubbles. If everybody from tech starts building a product, it becomes a product more centered towards tech and less empathetic about people outside tech. So there are a lot of companies who look like people who come from non-technical backgrounds as well. So don't be intimidated if you're someone who can't do extremely complex technical executions. Product management is for everybody. It's all inclusive. It allows everybody. And the other things are more about the mindset. So having an entrepreneurial mindset is extremely important. Which doesn't mean that you need to be co-founding a startup or running a business. I think it's always great to have that. But as long as you can think like an entrepreneur, I think you're pretty set. So if you can probably understand, like, hey, why is Oracle trying to acquire TikTok? You probably understand why. And if you can first sort of think in those strategic manners, you'll probably be in the same position as what the CEO of Oracle is going through. And I think that mindset is sort of helps you become a better product manager, because at some point in your career, maybe let's say you're one of the strategic members in Oracle's team who sort of wants to do the next big acquisition. You're probably in the same mindset as what those people are there. So I think that's where having the entrepreneur spirit really helps. And in general, also with execution. So execution is more in terms of how do you take an idea and sort of implement it. So you could be thinking of the next great idea, but if you know what are the engineering challenges to it, if you know how to work with a team and get them done, I think that's what execution matters. And other things about leadership, about being decisive and sort of pitching an idea or a product to a team and convincing them to be on the same page as you, has a lot of it's not as easy as you think, but it definitely comes with experience. And of course, communication being the fundamental, because you're essentially trying to like gather a lot of different people from different teams to be on the same page, because the product that you're going to pitch for the team to work on, everybody needs to agree on it, and only then they'll be motivated to work on it and sort of execute that. So these are just a bunch of extremely essential skills, and I think this will like help you get to a much stronger position. And yeah. So this is just another example. I might not run through every skill set examples, but this is just one of those things I collected. So this is an example where one of the product managers on SoundCloud took one of the comments that was floating around in one of the forums online, where someone was complaining about how bad the sound control on SoundCloud is. So I'm not sure if you used SoundCloud before, but I think now it's like much better. But probably several years ago, and I'm not sure how old this is common, but I think they had this really bad volume control. So let's say you're playing like really high music on SoundCloud, and all of a sudden somebody comes barges into your room, and now you're trying to like lower the music. Everybody starts going into this panic moment, and then they're like trying to find the volume control. They cannot find it, and that was like a big problem. So I think just like focusing more on the design and sort of making it more accessible to people to sort of just look at it and sort of control the music was one of those things that was a very big issue, which a lot of people face, but they could never really express it. So I think sort of being user focused, where you try to understand the user's problems and sort of finding a solution for it, is a great way to sort of do that. And design sense. Yeah, so when it comes to design, again, multiple ways to interpret it. This is just one of those ways I thought could be easily interpreted in this one slide. So this is a very typical boarding pass of Singapore Airlines, and which of course looks like a very typical one, pretty cluttered, all over the place. I bet only the people at airports can actually really figure out and decode what it means. But I think it's for every layman, which is like 90% of the people who are flying on airlines, cannot really decode what this means. It's just like a piece of paper for them. But what Virgin Airlines really did was like sort of rethink about the entire design of how boarding passes are made and add more value to the person, to the user itself. So now as a user, you'll be having this little boarding pass all throughout your journey. And I think they go a little extra mile by sort of adding little tiny details to it. For example, the temperature. And I think this is very important if you want to come from a really humid country to someplace really cold. You would want to know how. I mean, I'm sure you've done your research, but what if it's a country like London where it has frequent weather changes? At least being aware 24 hours before, or at least when the boarding pass is actually printed, it's good to know what the approximate temperature is going to be, so you know what the right clothes to sort of carry with you. So I think that goes a little extra mile along with the time zone. So I think this sort of adds so much value, and it's pretty clear. It's right to the point, delivers information, and I think this is what design sense really has a lot of difference to the end stakeholder. I think, and little caveats to being a product manager at the same time as well. As I mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, that as a product manager, you're not being a boss of anybody. So when someone does not listen to you, or are not completely convinced, you don't get to come on to them and be like, hey, I am someone who, I'm the PM, so you gotta listen to me. I think that's the last thing you ever want to do as a PM. It's like a big red flag to the team. And I have literally heard stories where when people hired the wrong PM, or perhaps the PM was not good, the entire team had to sort of leave the company or change a different team, and that was a big loss to the company. And before, things escalate. Of course, they try to correct the PM, but I think product managers also need to have a lot of empathy towards the team members, because you're like the cheerleader of the team, and you gotta get all of them. You gotta be bringing all the donuts and sort of cheering them up and motivating them to sort of getting getting to the goal. So yeah, that's pretty much what it feels like to be PM. But these are things you absolutely should not be doing. So yeah, these are just like when you work with engineering, when you work with other stakeholders. Yeah, so let's get a little more specific with the interview process as well. Perhaps one of those things with even getting interviews is extremely challenging. I understand. I struggled a lot to get interviews, but I think I'll give you two quick tips. One is, of course, when you apply to product manager roles, make sure you have a very PME resume, not like the generic software engineering resume. I will also talk a little bit about the resume in the coming slides. But there are two ways. One, cold email, cold call. Trust me, this is just my experience. I've literally cold called Sheryl Sandberg, who's the CEO at Facebook, and she responded, and a bunch of other who's who of Silicon Valley. And trust me, it works. It's free and it works. So if people like them can actually respond to you, a hiring manager is nothing. So make sure if you're really passionate, you know how to word your email, and you also try to keep it concise, try to keep it to the point, and actually let them know why you're interested in doing it. Because we live in a time when you can connect with anybody, like anybody to anybody, and there's no restriction to accessing the connection. So leverage that connection, cold email people if you're really passionate about it, because you don't get a lot of opportunities to cold email. And second is to actually go through referrals. So you might ask like, hey, I don't have any friends who work there, but you could always like ask one of UT Texas seniors who work at one of the companies and go through that channel. Those are the most effective ways. Because getting into product management again is very tricky because I think I'm not sure about the ratio, but I guess for every 100 software engineers, there's probably one PM. So again, it's pretty extremely competitive. So applying is a big challenge. So make sure you go to the most effective channel. So yeah, I think it starts with the resume first, because even if you get in, like, even if you probably go through a referral or go emails, first step is to be actually prepared. So if your resume is not great enough or good enough, even though you might be good if really passionate about a role, I think it's good to like sort of make sure your resume sounds like a PM, and you gotta sort of frame your sentences, frame your experiences in a way where it seems like you've done some sort of a PM kind of a job before. And I can like completely guarantee you that everybody has been in one of those PM kind of a role before. It's very human actually to be in a PM position. So make sure even if you don't have PM experience, you can always talk about an experience that you've been through. So let's say you've conducted a hackathon example, or maybe at high school you've done some sort of initiative that you've taken off. That's almost like sort of pitching a product to your faculty and getting them to sign it, and sort of you taking an initiative to do a program and conducting it from end to end. So that is an initiative that you've taken, and you're working with multiple stakeholders here. So it could be probably the sponsors, could be the hackers, could be the team that's building the website for the hackathon, could be multiple stakeholders, and you try to work with all of these people together to make this work. So I think as a college student, there's so many opportunities where you sort of take leadership opportunities. It could also be in a sporting arena, like any of these opportunities. So make sure you sort of mention that in resume. And also at the same time, when you do this, make sure it's quantitative. So you talk about the results that have happened as a result of what you did. So you could say, hey, I worked on this. We collected, X thousands of dollars for the sponsors, which, led to this much of revenue. Or it could also be in terms of, how much impact you've had, even as a software engineer, if you've made some sort of app or product or website. You can also always talk about how much, number of the latency that you've reduced, or the number of clicks that you've had, a number of customers who visit your website and end up buying an order. Because I think impact is what really makes a difference. Because if nobody's using a product, then I think it's not going to be that successful. So make sure you talk about in terms of numbers. That's like one of the best ways you can. That's like one of those things that every hiring manager looks at. And I also have a resume template, which I'll be sharing after the presentation. Make sure it's one page. So I think nobody likes more than a one page, and it's a very standard interview prep. Advice, like regardless of whichever stream you get into, stick to one page. And my last one again goes to more about the referrals. So anyone, make sure you're like applying through these channels. These are the most effective ones. You can always apply online, but the way I frame it is like it's a black hole of applications. When you apply, it just goes into a black hole, and nobody knows if anybody's actually going to review those resumes when you apply online, because there's thousands of resumes that every job posting has. So apply for referrals.
We actually have a question about that last point you had. Someone was asking, how do you get over the feeling that you're taking advantage over your friends/relationships to get opportunities?
Oh yeah, good question. So like it really depends on what kind of relationship you've had with this person. But ideally, I think what you gotta really do is at this point is sort of be again a little PME here, and don't like upfront go and ask them, hey, like, can you like just refer me to Google for like this product management role? Try to sort of actually be sure why you want to apply at Google first. See, it sounds fancy. I understand Google's one of the best companies out there, but try to really understand what is sort of driving you towards applying for this specific startup or the company that you work at. So let's say at Google, if you're really passionate about, let's say, Google's home product, so Google Home's voice product, if you really like it, if you probably build a Google Voice bot or one of the home skills, it's great to sort of talk about it and tell them like, hey, I really love this product. I've been using it for so long, and I would really love to connect with someone that you know, or perhaps if you could probably refer me, I would love to work on a specific team. Or if you have a friend who's worked at a startup, you can always be curious about what they have done and also be curious about the company itself. I think that's a good way to sort of segue into really asking for a referral. So you don't directly go for the kill. You do ask them for like, hey, can you like talk to me about your startup that you work at? What kind of team are you working at? Sort of getting an understanding with what they do, because you never know when you get hired by this friend's referral, you might probably be working with him as well or her on the same team, and he or she could be the software engineer you'll be working with, and at that point you got to be really understanding what this friend of yours is working on and how his typical day is like. So sort of getting better, good insights about what their day is and how is their collaboration with other product managers in the team is going to give you like a good insight about whether this is a position that's really meant for you or not. Because believe me, initially it's more about you might be like really interested in getting a foot in the door, but later on over time you realize like there are some good companies to work as a product manager, and there's some companies where product manager culture isn't really great. So you wouldn't want to like choose those, and you'll get picky over time. And I think it's good to be picky because you might end up like hating your role, and you never want that to happen because of the company of your choice that you've made. So long story short, try to understand this friend of yours, company before and the team even better, so you get like internal insights. And then if you feel like this is the right thing, always ask them like, don't be like, hey, can you just give me a referral? Tell them, do you think they are looking for someone with my skill sets as a PM intern or even as a PM, and let them make a choice. And that's the best way to sort of put them in a more comfortable position where you're not taking an advantage of them. Yeah. And that also sort of segues into a more relevant slide here, which is more about where to apply. This might be a little, a few years down the line when you sort of make a choice. But I think in general, there are three kinds of product managers again. So there's someone who's extremely techy, who wants to work on extremely technical products like VMware or like Amazon Web Services, which is more about understanding the servers and like trying to give them the right configuration, the features to the users. Or someone who just wants to be a generalist product manager. So you're not doing too much of tech, you're not doing too much of business, just like the right amount, like the right mix. So those like I think most companies sort of follow the generalist product management. Business oriented again could be more in like terms of Salesforce or banking applications or even gaming sometimes. Which could be more, which again, people have some choices. People do not find it very interesting. Salesforce, again, some people probably don't even use it. So it might not be the most interesting. So B2B products kind of fall into business-oriented ones. Mostly, there are some B2C as well. But I think the end goal is the end customers is what sometimes people get excited with. For me, I think for me, my experience would be more of a generalist one. I've had an experience of technical business and other stuff as well. So I think that's a choice that you can also make at some point later in a career. And also at the same time, it goes with the research as well. So I think when you talk to your friend about getting a referral, always do your research. So that's like the best point for research as well. So understanding like the company, who are the competitors, also trying to understand like, who are the customers? Like, are you one of the customers of using this product? It couldn't be Zoom for that matter. If you want to apply for a PM at Zoom, try to understand like, what it feels like to actually use the premium version of Zoom, because that's where the real customers are. Because most of free tier users are like just there, but they're not paying. But I think Zoom's real value comes from people who pay. So try to understand what the customers are like, how big is the market, trying to understand the revenues, the scale. All this information is like all publicly available. So just getting this idea would really put you in a very strong position when you start interviewing, and also trying to doing some homework before will put you in a big advantage, because the kind of questions you ask in an interview would really be the decision for whether you get hired or not. Yeah. So, and yeah, this is another good, interesting slide for you to sort of take notes of. I think these are some of the really interesting articles. I'm sure everybody has probably been through at least one or two of these. These are like really great sources for you to actually like getting yourself updated on the latest happenings in the venture capital or the tech industry in general, where you can sort of be in a good position to sort of understand what's happening in the recent times. And I think this is also where you sort of motivate yourself to become having that entrepreneurial spirit. Because I think having that motivation to think like an entrepreneur does not come easily unless you work with an entrepreneur or probably read these really interesting articles which sort of explain things in a very simple manner. So yeah, I think these are like really great resources for you. Um, and getting a little more specific towards the interview, this could be a little informative when you come to this role, when you come to this point, but just giving you a little heads up on what it feels like to interview for product management. Because it isn't easy. Like it is simple, but it isn't easy, is what I'm trying to say. So that's like, yeah, let's get into it. So ideally, a very typical product management, like this could also be for like PM internship or for a full-time role. Ideally, it starts with a phone interview. So this could be like probably a recruiter calling you up and trying to like warming you up about, trying to understand. So she tries to understand, or they try to understand, what are you, what are your background is like, and what am I interested, just to get a little gelling you up for the real actual rounds with the hiring managers. So this could also probably be with the first call could also be with the PM on the team who's trying to really evaluate you, asking like very basic questions about what you already know, as in their experiences, what projects you worked on, what are you studying at school, and what are your aspirations going next. So that is mostly just to filter out, candidates who really want this job really well versus also people who are really have the right skill sets. So just like basic warming up. And I think and then it goes with another round, which again, I think during COVID times, it's all phone interviews and like Zoom calls. So you might probably not have an on-site, but sometimes they have an on-site as a second round, and where, they call you to the headquarters and do a one-on-one with two other product managers, ideally. 2 to 3 depends on, if you're doing for an intern role, it will all be Zoom calls. But if it's a full-time role, there might be at least 5 panelists trying to like have a very brief discussion about a brief and a depth discussion of about multiple skill sets about your product management experiences. And this could be like tested on based on your design skills, your analytical skills, and also in general other skill sets that you might possess. And then they could also be a take-home exercise. I think a take-home exercise, in fact, is the most popular one these days, where in fact the phone interviews sometimes not even given to most candidates. For example, like I think a couple of years ago, I applied for Lyft's APM role, and then Uber, I guess. So Uber and Lyft have this initial screening via a take-home exercise, where I've heard like from internal insights that there are at least like about 5,000, I don't know, about 5,000 candidates apply for Lyft's APM roles, and roughly about 1,000, like less than 1,000 people actually are given the take-home exercises. So it's extremely rigorous, extremely competitive. But then I think that take-home exercise can actually decide whether you go for the next round or not. But I think in certain companies, what they do is that they kind of get a feel of the interviewee, and then they give you a take-home exercise, which typically would be a little exercise on how you think about products and how you implement it. And then there's a final offer. So typically phone interview, again, as I've mentioned and I've explained here, it starts with a quick warm up, 5-minute warm up, what your experiences are. Then they start with 2 simple exercises. So it could be one simple exercise about, what is your view or take on how do you redesign a sort of product, your favorite product of yours. And then, they could have a brief discussion about it for like 15 minutes. Another 15 minutes would be about a certain product management question, which I'll get into it very soon. Um, so these are typically, these are like the ways I've sort of segmented the types of questions. And I feel like this is all you need to know. These are the only categories of questions they might ask you. So it might be product design, or it could be analytical, behavioral, technical, or strategy, based on what company are you interviewing at. So for example, if you are interviewing at Google, they are very specific about technical skills. So you might definitely have like a little round about understanding your technical skill sets. So it could be about, hey, so what happens when you type google.com on the website, on the browser? So, what are the various things that happen behind the scenes? So, like maybe you can talk about how the servers are connected to each other and how it's interacting with it, and where is this page coming from, and stuff like that. But I think when it comes to the first topic, product design, again, this is again not specifically about the aesthetics of it. It's more about how you perceive design in a way of what happens one step off another. So if you want to buy a certain product on a website, how does the journey start for it? Like the user comes to the website, looks like the front page of it, finds a very interesting product, clicks on it, looks at the details, adds it to the cart, goes to the cart checkout page, and then pays. So that's what essentially design actually means when it comes to product designing. And it's less about the colors or the fancy fonts that you see. So I think it's more about the flow. So these are just some of the example questions, like how do you improve YouTube? And I think in general, I think in interviews, they intentionally try to keep it very open-ended, and they expect you to ask more questions so you can like really understand what are you trying to improve on YouTube. Or it could be Dropbox storage size. And I think these are like very specific in terms of um, how do you think about products in general. So I think the exercise kind of starts with right now, like when you look at certain products, you got to think from product manager's point of view. When you use every product, just try to think like, hey, why did we choose to sort of put this button on this part of the web page and not and elsewhere? So I think those exercises sort of start very naturally, and I started like sort of putting my mindset in those positions. And I'm happy to sort of share these slides later after the workshop to sort of give you a more holistic idea about how to sort of answer these questions. Analytical again, these are like the typical questions that can sort of be like a brain, like sort of a brain teaser, or perhaps not exactly a brain teaser, but more like it could look very intimidating at first, but I think it's very mathematical in terms of how do you determine these numbers. And again, just to be very clear, they don't expect you to be very accurate in terms of the answer that you look at. For example, let me take a random question here. So how many airplanes are flying in Brazilian airspace at 11 a.m.? Now, you would be like totally confused, like, hey, that's a very specific question. I have no idea how many airplanes are in Brazil's airspace right now. Like, how am I supposed to estimate that? And it's completely fine to be totally confused, but trust me, these are like some of the questions that have a certain, certain steps to sort of get to the answer. And ideally, it starts with just two approaches. So there's something called a top-down approach, or there's a bottom-up approach. So when I say top-down, what do you think about is like how many airplanes are in the world right now? So you come with estimates, and when you don't know the answer, you go back to level up. So you're like, okay, wait a minute. So what's the population of people on the Earth? So these are like known facts that you know. Like, okay, cool. So there's 7 billion people on the Earth on Earth. So how many airplanes could be there? Let's say how many airports are there? Let's try to calculate that first. So you do not know how many airports, but what you can ask them is like, okay, how many? Do I be specific about South America, North America? South America, or let's say North America for example here. So North America has 50 states there. So out of 50 states, let's take an approximate, like there's 5 airports in every state. So that's like 250 airports. So let's assume like every airport has about 10 airplanes at any given moment. So 10 airplanes becomes like, 250 into 10, so that becomes like 2,500 airplanes on the ground. And let's assume like there's 2 airplanes like sort of leaving the airport at any given point. So that gives you an approximate number on how many airplanes could be flying on the US airspace at any given point. And then you can add more additional edge cases like, hey, are there any military airplanes? Or there could be private airplanes as well. And adding those data could also sort of add more value. But I'm happy to sort of go a little more deeper into this at some point if you plan to another session. Behavior and execution. I think this is the most common topics that's always tested in every product manager interview. In fact, it always starts with a behavioral question. So typical behavioral questions are very common across all formats of interview. It could be software engineering, product management. They might ask you a question about talking about your typical failure, talking about like a time when you would, wanted to convince somebody in the team to take a certain decision. I think these are extremely important because on a day-to-day basis, you actually come across these challenges. So they want to see if you've actually come across a similar situation before, and if you'll be able to handle the situation in the future as well. It's okay to not have an answer, but it's not okay to not be prepared for questions like these. And that's why this is like a heads up questionnaire where I can like sort of come up with a few of them, and always try to like bring a story because stories are more convincing versus like artificially coming up with an answer where you hypothetically are in this space. So always try to find And I'm sure everybody on this call right now has had some scenario where they've had these situations, and they can always come. It's just that during the interview, at that point you might not think of it, but make sure you prepare for this way before, and you have a good narrative around it. And the technical ones. So this is again in most of the interviews that I've come across nowadays. I think it's kind of reduced. I mean, they might not get very technical, but make sure look at the type of company you're applying for, and especially the role. So the job actually demands you to have extremely good technical knowledge, and even if the product that you're working on has a lot of technical, um, you know, uh, a lot of technical sort of product to work on. So let's say if you're working on VMware's virtualization product, so requires a lot of technical knowledge, and I think you need to be prepared better in advance. So make sure you're familiar with the technical knowledge as well. These are some of the sample questions you might be asked. Um, Strategy. Now, again, strategy, this is more specifically important for when you look for a full-time role and when you're applying, at least with a bit of experience. And I think this is still common for like even PM internship, but it depends on what the kind of company is looking for, and if your role also has something to do with strategy. But I think strategy in general is something which most PMs should at least have in a bit, just like how I told you, why is Oracle actually sort of acquiring TikTok's data. So I don't know, like, I mean, people come up with like interesting hypotheses, but in general, you didn't know what is the intention, because Oracle makes like, business software, and they have nothing to do with fancy music or dances that happens on TikTok. But there's something down there, but it's more about the data that they have, which can sort of help them make better decisions and help them understand who could they sell this business software better to. Like, how could they be sort of they're targeting the younger audience, because these younger audience sort of would graduate very soon and sort of working in bigger companies where they actually be the end user of these business software. So I think information like this really helps them sort of sort of become better in their marketing campaigns, or even build their products in a more robust and appealing manner, which appeals the young audience. So I think in general, I think these are some tips where you can sort of take into in understanding how can you sort of get better at strategy. But I think this is an exercise you can do on a daily basis when you read interesting articles online and try to understand, like, without reading through the article, why is a certain company doing a certain action. So I think that's more of a strategy. And in general, this is like an overall brief about the interview process itself. So what you got to do is the general questions outside of the PM questions that are being asked. These are something which is very common in terms of the first round of interviews, which could be taken by the recruiter or even the PM as well. It could be about talking about yourself. Why do you want to work at, the specific company that you're interviewing at, and why are you switching roles? So I think there's a very common one where they want to know your motivation and what really drives you to become a product manager from like a software engineering role or perhaps a data science role. And make sure you have a prepared answer for each of these questions, so you don't have to think on the fly during the interview. So to answer them. So these are just some of those very interesting questions. But make sure one of those things is like try to show excitement and be friendly, because in the end you might end up like actually working with them. And this is a little low key secret that I think most interviewers like to work with people they like, and they're just like biased that way. So make sure you show that excitement, because in the end of the day, you're working with people and less with like non-living things or like the product directly. So if you are a good person, they find like really fun to work with. They'll definitely be more biased towards hiring you versus another candidate. So make sure you do your best, and like try not to be a little nervous. I know that's like not a practical advice, like telling someone like, hey, don't think about black color. At the moment you're thinking about, all you think is black at the moment. So I think with certain practice, you'll automatically get over the stage fear or the interview fear that you might have. Um, and especially like try to meditate a bit, breathe in, breathe out really works for me, especially a few minutes before the interviews. And that's like the key. And what happens after the interview is also kind of critical to sort of give that seamless experience where you sort of want to make sure that you send like thank you emails to your interviewer or recruiter and tell them like how much you really were excited about interviewing, and believing, like there have been times like I think I've been rejected more than ever gotten offers, and the ratio is like really bad, like maybe 1:100 or something. But I mean, all I'm trying to say is like with every interview I definitely got better at product management, like at least with cracking in interviews. So make sure that because all you want to see is like I think oftentimes people get really disappointed with the rejection But what they don't really see is like how much they actually got to learn with that little product, like, interview that they had an opportunity for. So always be thankful for the opportunity that someone actually trusted in you and gave this opportunity to interview, and get sort of giving that response back to them. Um, and I think in general, there are a lot of resources to even get it better at product management interviewing. There's a bunch of resources. I'm happy to put that in comments after this workshop, where I think practicing is one of the biggest keys, because I think that's like the key for any skill in the world, actually. But I think to practice product management interviewing, there's a lot of people in the same boat as you, and the best way to sort of get better at it when you actually are interviewing with a real company is not to bomb it. So having a mock of that is always better. So there's interviewing, what do you call, workshops, and there's also like platforms like Pramp, PRAMP, which really helps you connect with other people in the same boat as you, and you can always like set up mock interviews with them. The other additional resources, aside from actually getting, starting mock interviews, is this book called Decode and Conquer. This is considered to be like the Bible of like product management. Like if you read this book, you will be like far better with your confidence and your answering skills as well. It's like one of those books over here in my library. Like, and I think it's like one of the most critical ones. It really helped me like get from like 0 to 1. Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's like this. Like I can almost guarantee you. Like I can't guarantee you, but I can almost guarantee you that you will learn a lot about product management and how to answer the questions like on product management. Again, Lewis Lynn. I'm not affiliated with Lewis Lynn, but this is like the industry standard. And this is like the sample, framework that he says. It's called Circles method, very famous. This is used for product designing. So when someone asks you like, hey, how can you design a product like this? How can you redesign a product? You essentially got to use this framework. It's not a hard and fast rule, but this kind of puts you in a better state to sort of make that answer much effective. Yeah, and boom. So we are towards the end of our workshop, and I'm so happy that I got to like speak about it. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take them. If I probably not covered them into my slides or anything about my personal experiences or anything about product management or in general, I'm always happy to take questions on that.
Yeah, there's been a few questions while you're presenting, so I will just go back and kind of look at them. Ami asks, how do you know that your ideas aren't things that already exist? So I think this has to do with like the product design questions and interviews.
Sure. So you mean in terms of how can you redesign an idea?
Yeah,
Or
something similar to that.
okay, got it. Yeah, yeah, sure. So I think so. What you need to know is that I think in general, when it comes to an interviewing position, the one of the things that the typical interviewer is like likely to look for when you are answering this question is not about, oh, like are you thinking about something very innovative or like, out of the box. What are they really trying to like assess from your answer is like how are you, like what are the basic key criteria that you're considering before you deliver a product idea. So it could be so let's say let's think about a product, where let's say they're trying to say like, hey, how would you want to improve Snapchat? Looking at like the current design it is. So I think what you got to do is you got to have a conversation with the interviewer and try to like narrow down and what exactly they're looking for. So I think one of the best ways questions to sort of answer, ask them back again. This is, and again, this is like a really good coincidence that I have Circles method right here. So ideally, the best way to answer product design questions again is to follow this criteria. So you got to comprehend the situation. So you got to go back and ask them more specific questions like, hey, so what part of Snapchat are you, are we trying to improve? Or is there any specific goals that we have in terms of, what are we trying to improve? Are we trying to improve the number of people on the product, or like the number of people who are using the product? Or is it like, are people like taking less pictures? Or are we trying to improve the revenue of Snapchat? Or are we trying to, move to a certain, KPI? So that will sort of give you a much better answer on what are we trying to do. Because I think when it comes to redesigning a product, it's not about completely like sort of changing the flow of how people use the product. It could be in multiple aspects of how it needs to be redesigned, so as to sort of change a certain metric of the product. So if let's say Snapchat is losing a lot of money today, and they want to increase the revenue. So how do you redesign the product in a way where Snapchat makes more money? And how does Snapchat make money? Through ads. So we need to understand how are we going to increase revenues through Snapchat's app to increase revenue. So are we going to place better ads? Are we going to use machine learning to better understand users, like users' choices, or are we trying to sort of have a better product offering? So these are the kind of conversations you can have with the interviewer to sort of settle down on how do you want to redesign. So I think this is how, like, and if you look at the circles method, this is the kind of methodology you can like go follow it. And they're not looking for something totally out of the box, like, hey, introduce Snapchat spectacles, or something amazing that's like totally groundbreaking. So yeah, that's like, I hope that answers your question. Happy to sort of take a follow-up question to that.
Yeah, for sure. That really helped.
Awesome.
Ashna, do you want to ask your question out loud? If not, I can also read it.
Yeah, sure. I can ask. I was just wondering how important it is to have a business background when applying for product management internships.
Sure. Did you say business background?
Yeah, a business background. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I think for applying, you don't need to have like any specific background as such, because again, when it comes to the skill sets that you possess, there could be two ways you can acquire these skill sets. So one is through school, where you actually taught these skills by some of the best professors, or you could actually train yourself in these skill sets through multiple ways. So I come from a very, I don't necessarily come from a strong background where I had like some of the best professors or like community teach me. And it comes to business specifically, when you ask me for that question, I think I almost had, I come from a background like from a family who's everybody's been into the white collar jobs, or just like jobs in general. Nobody has had a successful business of that sort. I think in general it's just about the mindset. As I mentioned before, you just have to have the entrepreneur mindset, and I think you're good to go. So as long as you can like sort of justify why a certain product decision needs to be made on a business perspective, and when I use the word business here, it's in a very crude manner, where I don't expect like, hey, I need you to know like, hey, is this X number of revenues that companies are making with it or not? I think those are skills which are very easy and simple to acquire with a bit of experience, if you've actually implemented that in real time. And if not, there's always better ways to acquire this skills by looking at case studies. So case studies are like some of the best ways to understand business impacts on certain companies. So there's millions of case studies out there, and I could recommend this one resource where I've mentioned one of my slides. It's called Case. Just quickly run through that slide. It's called Case in Point. Yeah. So there's a book called Case in Point. If you lack a bit of business acumen, or perhaps you're not too confident that you could actually pull off a business-based, a question, Case in Point is a great book which talks a lot about, what are the various, strategic, strategic moves that have happened in the past, and what kind of, use cases are there for those specific case studies that have happened. So you don't necessarily have to have a business background. As I said, it's a pretty open field. If you can possess and show your skill sets in your product in your resume, in your work, you're good to go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think there's a question on like if this PowerPoint would be available in the Discord. Do you think you could send a link to it in like the general Discord? Okay, cool.
Yeah, sure, I'll do that.
Perfect. Yeah, Krish is also one of our mentors. So if you have follow-up questions or you want to talk to him like one-on-one, I'm sure he'd be open.
For sure, yeah. I'll be available in Discord, so like feel free to message me. I'm always open to like any questions. At the same time, like I think I didn't mention my link here, but you can always go to my website. I'll probably like put it on my chat. It has a lot of resources into product management itself. So just a second. I've written like a bit of, why do you need to do product management? I mean, just like beginner resources. So lots of links out there, and that can sort of like help you get a little more ground on how to get into product management. Yeah.
I have a link to it. I'll send it in the Zoom chat for you.
Yeah. Also, if you're more interested in getting to know more about my specific background and also like a little bit of peek into what I'm planning to do in the next few years, I think my portfolio will sort of talk a bit about that as well. So if you have any questions on how to build it or strategize that the thinking or get inspirations about it, yeah, do have a look and let me know what you think. Happy to sort of help you on that as well. So I think building a portfolio is another great way to get interviews. I think I was interviewing very recently, and I think every single person sort of landed on my webpage and sort of, I don't know, at least the hiring managers were pretty impressed. So that was definitely one of those conversation points I had in my interviews. So every interviewer that I interviewed with, every company that I interviewed with, sort of spoke about the website as well. So I mentioned a bit about what I'm looking for in the next role, and a little more deeper. I went really deep into what I kind of look at product management and how I want to see myself. So I think a lot of interviews sort of complimented me on that, and I think that is what is. So I'm not trying to say that everybody has to have a portfolio, but essentially that gives a lot of confidence for companies to give a little peek inside who you really are and how can you be useful for them when you join the company. And I think that is one of those questions that I kind of address way before I even get into the role. So I think essentially the idea is to sort of build credibility before you get into the role, to sort of help them give more confidence, to give you an opportunity to even interview. Because again, interviewing is very difficult. Like getting that interview has been really hard. But over time, I realized like what are the best and most effective ways to get an interview, and then to sort of impress interviewers even before you speak to them. So I think having a look at my website will definitely give you a slight idea why I'm saying that. Yeah.
Hey, Krish.
Hi, Christine.
Could I ask you a little bit about, I know you mentioned it's on your portfolio, but I was also just wondering, you have a lot of experience with startups doing product management. Is there something that stood out to you about working in a more startup setting versus a more established or bigger size company for you?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Thanks for bringing that out, actually. So I think very well put, sort of, noticed. I think I do come from a very hardcore startup experience. When I say startup experience, it started it started back in college itself, where I was extremely enthusiastic about building products or projects, or even in a very crude manner, even if every hackathon was like a startup for me. It was like very, sort of evaporative project that I had every weekend, and one of them turned out to be one of my startups. So for me, I think when it comes to working at companies, I think I was very aspirational in the beginning. I really wanted to sort of get into some of the big tech companies. I did successfully get a few interviews, but I wasn't like very effective, or maybe I couldn't make into the top 1% to get into the top tech companies. So for me, I think what I've learned over time is that when you start working I think the best way to get into product management is at startups. Because a lot of startups in general, I think nowadays we see a lot of startups actually just coming out every couple of months. If you look at YC startup, Y Combinator's, every season they sort of invest in companies. There's like so many companies these days coming out. So every company needs a product manager if they want to build a team. So that's like the best way to sort of get into product management, and that's like the best way I got into product management. And that's where I've learned a lot of different skills, because at startup you tend to like learn a lot of different. You wear different hats. You have more authority of what can be done and built, because startups work extremely fast, and then they sort of like got to ship quickly. They got to like launch quickly. They got to take decisions really quickly. At the same time, you get to learn about hiring. You get to understand about the entire industry. You get to understand about you work very closely with the CEO, the founders, which is not a case when you work at Google or Facebook, where you don't get to work with like Mark or Sundar Pichai on a day-to-day basis. But in a startup, you actually know what the CEO is going through, and you can like make an impact on a much higher level. So if you look at Instagram when it started off, it had only 10 people. So imagine if you were one of those PMs in that team, you would have such a massive amplitude of impact. And you get to learn a lot like about different challenges on the engineering side and different sides. So for me, I think working at a startup really got me to like doing design part-time, because when I was working at this Japanese startup, I was doing UI UX design, I was doing product management, I was working with the engineers very closely. I remember there were certain days I sort of also had to recommend what is the best technical stack to also work with for them, because I had a bit of technical acumen. But I think startup really sort of for me, at least with working with a Japanese startup initially, it was almost like 3 years compressed into one. It was so much wealth of knowledge all compressed together, and it's almost like a boot camp. Like that's like not the best way to put it, but like it was a lot of interesting experience compressed in one. So I think my plan is to sort of work in such situations because that sort of matures you as a product manager and as even as a thinker much quicker than you work at a big company. Now, let me tell you a bit about big companies. So when you start working at a really large tech company, you might have a lot of impact, but you have less authority and like less of responsibility. You're more constrained towards the specific product. In fact, the very specific feature within the product to work on. So you might not have too much, sort of power to execute a certain action because there's certain authority levels you can't cross. Like you got to get a lot of permissions from certain high authorities to, sort of release the feature or sort of pass through a certain yes, red or green signals. So that sort of gives you pretty an disadvantage. So for me, what I sort of think through is like, if you want to get into a big tech company, there's a lot of money out there. There's like a lot of stability, but startups actually these days pay as much money as much, the big tech companies pay. So for me, I think startups are like kind of like, because I come with a startup founder mindset. So it puts me in a good position to work at a startup and execute on those. So at least for the next couple of years, I do plan to work at a startup as a PM. And there's a lot of work to be done. You got to do a lot of work in general, but it's very interesting. It's a lot of fun. Trust me. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of variety and a lot of opportunity to learn the business better. So I really love that perspective. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks. And another thing I totally forgot to also mention, I think big tech companies sometimes, again, this is not like very typical right now, but earlier, I think a lot of tech companies still have this criteria. They got to come from big B school, from big tech, like, a big branded school like Stanford, MBA, or Harvard Business School to become a product manager. And startups don't have that. So, you'll kind of have an edge there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? If not, I know we're a little over time, so a lot of people